So without further ado, my job is to now introduce, as I mentioned, my colleague, Jen Hope. Jen's the area director for the East and West Midlands, but she's also our senior policy lead for mental health. And she's been doing some, well, I personally think as a colleague, some amazing work particularly over the last year. So I'm really grateful that she's here and willing to share that with us. So I will hand over to you, Jen, and you can carry on.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you to Thrive London for inviting me to be a part of the webinar this afternoon. I think, as if by magic, some slides will appear shortly. So I've got 10 minutes to outline some of the key bits of policy, but also outline where we think some of those priority issues are across the further education sector. So I will go through at some pace, but you will get the recording and you will have the slides after. So if we could move on to the first slide, please. This is an overview of where some of those headline policy areas are and some feedback from some of our communities of practice and the report we produced in May last year. So on the next slide, the 5 headline priorities that we really heard our colleagues across colleges sharing with us in terms of those big headline issues that are impacting them and their students. And very broadly speaking, it's just recognising the significant increase in mental health difficulties experienced by our students in FE and what that means in terms of the pressure on college services. We also wanted to acknowledge a decline in staff mental health as well. There are lots of conversations where we look at workload and the risk of burnout, amongst a number of other challenges as well across the sector. But we heard loud and clear that this was a conversation that was important for us to further. We also wanted to acknowledge, and again, kind of listening to the feedback through both the report and conversations we're having with colleagues across the regions, is that the need for staff development to make sure staff feel that they have the confidence and skills to support students with their mental health needs, and so particularly in light of the increase in volume of demand and complexity of need as well. In particular, there was an ask for some specific mental health training for staff who are supporting neurodiverse students, and then it's about working in partnership across the sector to make sure we're signposting and creating new resources, lesson plans and things that support staff across the sector. So we've been busy doing lots of different things with these priority areas, and if we move on to the next slide, please. Our mental health reference group is made up of senior leaders and senior mental health policy leads from colleges who've come together to look at various data and research and drawing on their own experience to identify, well, what can we do, what can we put into practice to support mental health and wellbeing within our organisations. And we've broadly broken these into four priority areas that focus on student mental health, staff mental health, the importance to acknowledge leaders within this conversation too, as well as a fairly hefty conversation around the things that happen in terms of our systems and institutions. So the 3 kind of priority projects on the screen now relate to student mental health. Largely this is about just really getting to understand what the challenges are and making sure there is opportunity for conversation and research so we can give that evidence position. Really important to articulate the difference between safeguarding mental health and wellbeing. We interchange between these terms quite a lot. It might mean different things within education and health, and I guess opportunities like this afternoon, it's really good to have that conversation around, well, what do we mean, what do we need, and how do we work in partnership to make sure we're putting the best support in place for our students. And finally, there was, again, a really significant ask to look at the impact of gender identity on students' mental health in a number of different areas in terms of the support that's available and the conversations we have within our organisations. On the next slide, the focus on staff mental health and wellbeing, again, was to be able to articulate some of the causes behind the increase in staff access in mental health support services. Again, just that honest conversation, detailed conversation around exploring that lived experience, addressing those workforce learning and development needs. And again, there are opportunities where we work in partnership across the sector to bring those opportunities to staff in colleges. And then also making sure we are creating spaces to share good practice. And I think this afternoon is a really good example of that. On the next slide, we have a couple of points to look at our leaders in terms of driving that whole college approach and what the responsibility is on leaders and governors in this space, but also acknowledging that the mental health and wellbeing of our organisational leaders is also key in this. We want everyone to be well, we want everyone to thrive, and we wanted to acknowledge that we wanted to make sure leaders were definitely on the map for this conversation as well. On the next slide, the final piece around the systems and institutions is probably where the vast majority of our conversations have sat, because this is often where some of the causes, the underlying causes to some of the pressures organisations are experiencing. So a conversation around what the true cost is of delivery, worth noting that in terms of college funding, mental health isn't funded. We don't have income other than the Senior Mental Health Lead training grant, which you'll hear about later on this afternoon. But it is one where colleges are kind of being incredibly resourceful to look at how they deliver this, and an important conversation is having a look at what that true cost is, both in terms of the current delivery, but also what we think the anticipated future need is too, and how colleges are able to support that. We also need to recognise that there's some inconsistencies in terms of support and access across the country, again, because of the way different things are funded, the pressures on external services in terms of the waiting lists, and we're seeing an increase across all services. So again, it's just looking at that relationship between health and education and what we can do to support that, both regionally and nationally. And again, just looking broadly around the expectations of what the role of a college is in this space, what services can be expected, and again, how we work in partnership for that change. And a really interesting piece of work is looking at how students are supported as they move through their learning journey from schools to colleges to universities and background again, because there's no such thing as a linear path in this. Really conscious that this is the fastest that I'm going to go through this information. On the next slide is just some broad policy asks that AOC will be focusing on in the run up to the general election and beyond. Not surprisingly, we will be having conversations around resource and sustainable funding for us as a sector, so we can adequately support that whole college approach to mental health and wellbeing. We will continue to have those conversations as outlined in the previous slides around infrastructure and accountability systems, and everyone has a part to play in this in terms of both government and colleges, but it really is about working together. So again, that integration and collaboration between different parts of the education system, as well as between education and health. And our new FE student support champion is going to be instrumental, I think, in terms of a voice within the FE sector. The next few slides, and I think in terms to make sure that we don't run over time too significantly, I won't go through all of the detail, but suffice to say that the Mental Health Charter was launched just over a week ago. We're really excited to present the Charter within a framework, so there's a lot more guidance that sits behind this now. There's there's a few more kind of steps to this to make sure that students and staff are supported within that whole college approach to mental health, and the framework is that piece of guidance that supports colleges and any education institution actually to walk through the so we've got 4 themes and some good practice principles that support colleges and other organisations to put that good practice into practice. It's aligned with the other pieces of accountability or legislation, in particular that link to the DfE 8 principles for a whole, 8 principles for a whole college approach to mental health and wellbeing. Again, just making sure that the different structures and systems are talking to each other a little bit more, which hopefully will support practice on the ground. The next slide, I think, goes into a little more detail around the Charter. Just to flag that there are 4 themes. So we look at student mental health, staff mental health, the role of leaders and governors, and a piece to make sure there's guidance on how we evaluate our practice and measure the impact, because we want to make sure that we're doing something that actually makes a difference to staff and student mental health. So linked to the DfE principles and aligned with various other pieces of accountability. And if anyone hasn't signed up yet, that email address is what you need to be able to access the Charter and the guidance. The next slide goes into the detail of those 4 themes. So again, leadership and ethos, support for students, workplace wellbeing, and then a piece to look at evidence and impact. And underneath this, on the next slide, you'll see that we outline some good, about 8 to 10 good practice principles linked to some core standards under each of those themes. So there's a lot of guidance and support, which will hopefully bring some consistency in terms of practice between colleges. Everyone's at a different point of that journey in terms of embedding a whole college approach to mental health and wellbeing. Colleges will be looking at the kind of the services and support to make sure it meets their local need. So everyone could be doing something slightly different, but in terms of a principle, we think this is that this goes a long way to support that consistency in terms of delivery and being able to articulate the impact that you're making. Sometimes some of this work is about celebrating the good practice that exists in the sector. On the next slide, we have, I thought just to close, to make sure that I'm signposting to some examples of some of that excellent practice that's taken place, and very complementary to the presentations you'll hear following this one. We've just finished our second of 3-year programme with the ETF to look at mental health from a leadership perspective. There's a really engaging podcast series that I recommend everyone clicks onto to listen to, something that's worth listening to in the car. If you just go back one slide, sorry. That podcast is there that so it's got a suite of different interviews with sector leaders to look at different elements of mental health and wellbeing. The themes this year were to look at suicide, to look at mental wealth, and to look at how we manage our teams and our wellbeing within a crisis, because to kind of recognising the world that we're currently living in. Some really moving blogs. And again, all of the links are there directly to listen to some personal stories, but also some signposting to some invaluable resources too. And that final slide has got some additional resources that were created as part of this project, as you'll see, across a wealth of different subjects and topics. And you can access the 6 resources that were developed last year as well. The ETF website, underlined bit at the bottom, is a link. So when you get the slides, you'll be able to click on that and access those resources. And we'll continue to develop resources, ensure we have spaces like this to have conversations and bring all the right people around the table to share some good practice and respond to your needs by producing these new resources as the conversations continue. And I think that's my whistle stop tour finished.
Thank you, Jen. That's very impressive. That was a lot of material to cover in 10 minutes.
Yes.
so well done. And just to reiterate, as Jen said, the presentations that will be shared with you do have live links in them, so you'll be able to click through and get access to lots of the resources that are there. And I've also got this image now of everybody listening in their cars to the podcast, so that's a nice one to go with. So thank you, Jen, for that. I'm going to move straight on, if that's okay, to introduce Laura. So Laura Kennedy works for the Department of Education. She's the lead in the Mental Health Delivery Division, the lead for London in the Mental Health Delivery Division. So I'm particularly pleased that she's able to join us this afternoon and to talk through some of her priorities and the work that she's been doing. So over to you.
Thanks, Mary. I'm just going to share my slides, but if you can't see them, let me know.
Everybody always likes this moment, don't they? That pause. So will it happen? Or are you going to share your shopping list? But no, it looks very positive. That's exactly right. We can see it. Thank you very much. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. So yeah, good to see so many people on the call. So to very quickly introduce myself, as Mary said, I'm the DfE Regional Mental Health Lead for London. So my role is to work to promote and deliver DfE's key programmes which support mental health and wellbeing in schools and colleges, with a focus on the London region. And one of those programmes, which I know Mary and Jen, you've kind of mentioned already, is our Senior Mental Health Lead training. So I'll speak about that in more detail in this presentation. So I've got about 10-15 minutes. So what I'm going to cover, I'm going to kind of talk about the really important role colleges play in supporting the mental health and wellbeing of their students and staff. That goes without saying. I'll talk a bit about the whole college approach. Again, it was referenced on Jen's slides, but just to kind of talk about what we mean by a whole college approach to mental health and wellbeing. And what are the 8 principles that underpin that approach? And again, I'll talk about CFE Senior Mental Health Lead training. I know some of you kind of FE colleagues might have undertaken the training already or heard about it, but I thought it was worth mentioning again for those that haven't, just so we can make sure that funding is kind of going to colleges. And to finish, I'll talk a bit about the kind of new support resources we have for colleges in the mental health and wellbeing space. So just to come on to this, so at DFE, we really recognise that colleges play a really critical role in promoting and supporting mental health and wellbeing. I know many of you may work in kind of the mental health space on this call, so you might be aware of the statistic that 75% of enduring mental health disorders have commenced by the age of 18, 50% at age 15. So it just shows that, you know, this is a really critical time in a young adult's life. And if we really focus on kind of preventing those mental health issues from escalating through providing early intervention support, whether that's through a school or colleges or outside of that, we can really kind of reap the benefits in kind of later years. And I thought I'd kind of summarise the kind of key roles on this page that colleges can play in supporting mental health and wellbeing. So that, of course, prevention is there. So I think just by kind of students and staff being in a kind of supportive, welcoming environment in a school, which kind of celebrates diversity and encourages kind of respect for peers, can have a knock-on impact on mental health and wellbeing. And of course, kind of identification, early support, referral, they're kind of all really closely linked. So college staff will know that kind of college kind of student body really well, and will be able to kind of see whether there's kind of particular students or particular groups that might need additional mental health support, whether that's kind of referring to external agencies if those needs are kind of more severe, or providing in-school provision, in college provision, but also whether kind of bringing in or commissioning additional services outside the college. So there's kind of various different roles a college can play in promoting mental health and wellbeing. So to come on to the next guys, so a whole college approach to mental health and wellbeing. So what are the 8 principles? And again, many of you may recognise this kind of wheel diagram. It was developed by Public Health England, which is now OHID. It's supported by DFE and the kind of Department of Health and Social Care. And it summarises the 8 key principles that underpin a whole school college approach to mental health and wellbeing. At DFE, we really believe a whole school college approach is a fundamental way that we can get kind of holistic, sustainable mental health and wellbeing support to as many young people as possible. In sum, what we mean by a whole college approach is, staff and student mental health wellbeing is a key consideration for colleges when developing their policies, procedures and provision. So it's kind of at the heart of everything they do. And when exploring a kind of a whole college approach, we really think this framework is a brilliant way of a college evaluating and developing their mental health provision and practice in a strategic way. So just to kind of talk a little bit more about the kind of 8 principles and what they mean. We know that a college, will not be starting from zero, but there'll be certain kind of areas or principles around a kind of mental health and wellbeing approach that they want to develop further. That could be kind of student voice, targeted support, identifying needs. And it's also really important to flag the makeup of a student population from a school and college can be very different, as well as the type of provision in a college and the type of environment that a college provides. So some of these principles are more likely to be applicable to kind of a college environment than a school environment. With limited time, I won't go through every principle, but I might just mention a few that may be more kind of relevant for colleges. But of course, I want to kind of initially point to that kind of middle principle, which is leadership and management. And it's really important that, there's kind of senior visible leadership for emotional health and wellbeing in a college. For holistic change to really happen in a college, we really think it needs to be kind of a valued priority by the leadership, whether that's kind of the senior leadership team, the governing body, or middle leaders. A team that champions efforts to promote mental health and wellbeing is really essential in ensuring that kind of changes are accepted and embedded. So again, just to maybe pull out a few of these principles. So student voice, so how does kind of a college ensure that students have the opportunity to express their views and influence decisions? So that could be involving students in decisions that impact them. So that's kind of looking at policies and procedures that college may be kind of refreshing or implementing, and seeing if they can kind of consult students about how best to kind of design those policies. That could be kind of behaviour policies, reward policies, an enrichment offer in a college. There's various different things that could kind of have a knock-on impact on their mental health and well-being whilst being in college. Another one there is looking at kind of staff development is really important. Jan, I know you spoke a lot about the importance of staff wellbeing for them to kind of look after themselves, and also that's the only way that they'll be able to kind of look after the kind of students they are teaching. So there's various ways. So I know that a lot of colleges may kind of train their staff in mental health first aid training, sorry, for example. So looking at kind of what are the needs of a kind of student population, and how do you need to kind of train your staff to be able to kind of identify needs. And also on the self wellbeing side, a lot of kind of settings have kind of staff wellbeing leads, staff committees, to really look at how are they supporting kind of staff wellbeing in their setting, and making sure that the college is a really kind of good place to work. And the last one I might just look at is, again, kind of targeted effective support there. So how does the college ensure effective identification of students who would benefit from targeted support, and ensure appropriate referral to specialist services? So that's kind of forging links with external health services, having kind of seeing whether there's kind of specialist staff roles that could be kind of employed in a college that have mental health and wellbeing in their remit. There's various ways that a school can kind of implement kind of targeted support. So let's talk about the DFE training to support schools and colleges to implement a whole school college approach to mental health and wellbeing. So the Department for Education is still offering a grant of £1,200 for eligible state-funded schools and colleges in England to train a senior mental health lead to develop and implement a whole school college approach to mental health and wellbeing. So again, by a senior mental health lead, what we mean is this is kind of a strategic leadership role in a school or college responsible for overseeing kind of the setting's holistic approach to mental health and wellbeing. In terms of who that mental health lead could be, it could be kind of someone from the senior leadership team, or alternatively, it could be someone, kind of who's part of the staff kind of body working with colleagues, who is empowered to develop and oversee their setting's whole school college approach to mental health and wellbeing, with the kind of backing of the senior leadership team. So we've been offering this training for about 3 years now. It's not compulsory, but it's part of our commitment to offer this training to all eligible settings by 2025. We're really keen for kind of as many settings as possible to kind of apply for the grant. So we would say that to ensure that you do get the grant, we would say, please reserve the grant by the end of March 2024. And then book to attend a training course that begins at any point up until kind of the spring summer term. I can talk about the application process in kind of the next slide, but it's also worth mentioning that we know that there was kind of a real need for schools and colleges who have claimed a first grant, and then their trained mental health lead has kind of left the setting before fully developing a whole school college approach to mental health and wellbeing. So that's why for the kind of schools and colleges that are in this situation, they can claim a second grant now to kind of train a new lead to develop a kind of holistic approach to mental health and wellbeing. So again, this just talk a bit about the application process. So there's a kind of over 90 DFE quality assured courses that schools and colleges can choose from. They're all aligned to the 8 principles of a whole school college approach. There's full flexibility with courses to suit needs. So whether that's kind of someone who feels like they're a beginner, they've just taken on kind of the mental health lead role, and they need to kind of know the kind of essentials to get going. Or we know that some people have done lots of different courses in the mental health and wellbeing space, so probably a more advanced expert course as a refresher would be more appropriate for them. Again, there's varied time commitments. It can be online, self-guided, kind of face-to-face. There's kind of a varied costs of courses, but the grant is still kind of £1,200. And it's probably worth noting that some courses may be particularly tailored to a college audience. So, you know, if there's any kind of FE colleagues on the call, to look out for this when researching courses, or alternatively, if you've kind of chosen a provider, it might be worth speaking to them directly about kind of suitabilities for a college audience. And I know that there's a few college courses that I could mention that do kind of cater more for a college audience. I think the Charlie Waller Trust, it might be worth looking at, or Anna Freud, to just kind of name a few. And again, how to claim a grant. I'll quickly run through this because I know there's not much time, and I really want to get on to kind of the college speakers. But so it only takes 5 minutes to reserve a grant on kind of a gov.uk page. You confirm your eligibility, then you kind of book your chosen course, and then you upload evidence of that booking, and then payments are made from DFE on a quarterly basis. And if you'd like to apply for a second grant, the application process remains exactly the same, but when you're completing the first online form, you just need to make sure that you tick a declaration to confirm your previously trained lead has now moved on from the role. And very quickly, so there's a few new resources that DFE has developed alongside the Anna Freud to support schools and colleges to implement a whole school college approach to mental health and wellbeing. So Anna Freud has launched a mental health leads resources hub. So this was launched in November last year. Again, it was developed in partnership with DFE and funded by us. And that kind of site signposts a range of kind of external resources to support schools and colleges to embed a whole school college approach to mental health and wellbeing. Those resources can be filtered by which of the 8 whole school college principles you may be looking to develop, whether that's kind of staff wellbeing, targeted support, identifying need, and importantly, as well as kind of type setting, so you can kind of search resources that are applicable to both a college and a school setting. And it's probably worth saying as well that Anna Freud are continuing to kind of add to this hub, so it's not kind of a static hub, they're still adding resources for schools and colleges. And a kind of separate but related tool, so again, we work with Anna Freud to develop a targeted support toolkit. So this was recently launched a few months ago, and it kind of has 2 separate elements to it. So there's firstly kind of a guide that helps schools and colleges to review and refresh and embed an effective targeted support offer for mental health and wellbeing. So that's kind of guidance. And then the second part of this toolkit is a tool which is kind of an interactive library of support options designed to identify forms of evidence-based targeted support. So you can kind of filter by different categories. So again, you can filter by setting type. So you can filter by college, age, what outcome you're looking to achieve. So I guess, you know, there's social and emotional well-being, that's a really important outcome, behaviour issues as well, the delivery method, so you could be looking at individual interventions, group interventions, and who's it kind of delivered by kind of school, college staff, external specialists. And then once you kind of search for all those different elements, then a kind of a list of targeted support options will kind of appear on your page, which could meet the need you're trying to address. And it also kind of shows the evidence behind those interventions. So hopefully that's quite helpful to see kind of how impactful they've been on kind of other cohorts. But yes, that's everything from me. I think there's kind of, I've seen there's a few questions in the chat which I can answer, and I know there's kind of allocated time for questions later in the session. But yeah, thank you. I'll pass back to you, Mary.
Laura, thank you very much for that. I just wonder whether you want to just take those 2 questions, because then we can have a bit more of a discussion at the end. But given that 2 people have managed to get in quickly, and they are fairly straightforward questions, I'm guessing. Well, yes. To me, they look like they're quite straightforward. Yes, the answer's no, isn't it?
Yes, that's the first. Yeah, so unfortunately, it's just for state-funded schools and colleges. It's not for university, but I can happy to signpost kind of other kind of university support that might be available. But yes, that's right. That's just for colleges and schools. Is training available for home education?
Yeah, so it's the same.
I think. Yes, I think I'll come back to that. But yeah, I think that again, it's just schools and colleges. But yeah.
No, thank you. And actually, although Laura's sounding a little bit apologetic, I have to say it's so rare for things to be specifically designed for colleges that not just schools, that it's actually a very, very welcome intervention. So thank you, Laura. We're going to move on, and if you want to just stop sharing your slide, thank you, Laura, that would be lovely. So we're going to move on in a moment, and really just to reassure perhaps some of the people who joined us from non-college settings that a lot of the work that we're going to hear about now, although located within a college setting, works very much with partner organisations as well. So so you don't need to log off just yet. There's still best practice that you can certainly, I believe, learn from and contribute to. So I'm going to introduce now Sharon. Sharon Cousins is the Vice Principal Adult Programmes and Student Services at Newham College, and also one of the members of the NAMS Executive, which is the National Association for the Management of Student Services, Managers of Student Services. Does that sound about right, Sharon?
So that right.
Oh, I got it right. So I'm not going to describe how many years Sharon's worked in education, because it's been about the same amount of time as me, and it's a bit of a giveaway about how old we are. So we're just going to pass on that, but just to say that she's very experienced and has worked at the senior manager level for a number of years, developing systems and processes to primarily to support student services, and obviously over time that's increasingly moved into the area of providing mental health support services as well. She's also got lots of experience of working with local authorities to develop initiatives which re-engage young people who are not in education, employment or training. So so a wealth of experience to share, and Sharon has kindly said that today she'll just talk to us about some of the work that she's done with the senior leadership team in Newham College to develop their whole college approach to mental health and wellbeing, both for students and staff. So I'm going to just hand over to you now, Sharon. Thank you very much.
And I think my slides, there we go.
Yes, they are there. Beautiful.
Yeah,
thank
brilliant.
you.
Thank you very much. So that was just the introduction. Just as a bit of background, which people that know me, and I know some people on the call quite well, but I'd say early 30s, I did actually retrain. So I'm also a qualified counsellor, hence my absolute passion for, you know, adults and young people and mental health. So it comes from a place of, you know, working in the field of mental health as a qualified counsellor in places like Mind and in schools, actually, counselling young people with their mental health problems. So hence, I have a real passion for this side of things, and I'm lucky enough in colleges to hold the position I do to make sure that my peers take this on board. So we can flip over to my first slide. So for those of you, it's on the graphics, but Newham College is actually a London college. We're not part of a group at the moment. We are a standalone college, but we have a couple of large campuses, and we also have an Institute of Technology. I am a vice principal, but I have worked in many roles in student services, right from being a practitioner, you know, through to head department directorship up to my VP role at the moment. And I've taken on adult programmes because Newham College London has a very large cohort of ESOL learners, both young and adult. And I think as much as we think about some of our mental health support and our whole college approach around young people, especially if you work in some of the large city colleges, you will know that, you know, our adults also present with mental health concerns. Many of those are asylum seekers or new entrants to the country, and have, you know, experienced quite a lot of traumatic events in their life, which then leads to undiagnosed mental health concerns. So for me, I do have the ear of my senior leadership team. We have quite a small exec. It's just 3 senior members and a governing body, of which myself and another VP report into. So, you know, my senior leadership team don't get a moment not to think about mental health and the impact it has on our young people. So I suppose if you're in a college, if you've got someone like me that you can, you know, have their ear and make sure they're raising it with your senior leadership team and your governors. I do presentation to our governors, but also thinking about our staff. I also hold meetings with union representation to speak about mental health with my HR colleagues and the impact that has on staff and staff workload. Again, I've been at Newham now for 2.5 years. It didn't happen overnight, but this academic year, I actually won quite a landslide case, and I now employ and have increased some specialist staff posts that are looking at how we support our learners with behaviour, with mental health and with welfare support, and I'll come on to that in a later slide. We do incorporate it, as I'm sure a lot of colleges and other training providers do, universities and discrete provision. We do incorporate an element of staff wellbeing in all of our staff development days, and it's also incorporated across our student enrichment, so both in our student engagement, our student voice and our tutorial programs. And then we also look at how we can embed it into adult curriculum so that they don't get forgotten because they may not have an actual tutorial programme. We do have a dedicated staff working group, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And I've put mental health first aid there because in terms of staff training, we've now got an approach where it isn't just about a singular student service team or a singular safeguarding and welfare team. Lots of our staff across our curriculum also have had their mental health first aid training. We've also put quite a lot of people through safeguarding level 3 training. So any training that I come across that's around supporting learners with mental health first aid, safeguarding, behaviour, emotional support, we do try and get as many staff as possible. It's not just focused and targeted to one team. We can move on to my next slide. So the start of the journey, I was lucky enough to undertake some of the senior mental health lead training from the early days. So I went on one of the very early courses. So I've been involved in this journey for the last couple of years. I haven't been at Newham very long when I signed up for my grant. So yeah, if anyone hasn't taken advantage of the grant, please do, because it was very effective and was a nice way of getting some CPD that, you know, your college doesn't have to fund. So we looked at carrying out some audits. So I ran some audits both for staff and students. Again, I'll go back to, and I know it's part of the charter and part of what the DfE are looking at. Please don't forget your staff. You know, we can all focus on our students, but staff are just as important when we're managing workload and staff wellbeing. We then looked at some action plans in terms of short, medium and long-term action plans, because I knew some of this wasn't going to happen overnight, and some of it, you know, I still haven't achieved, but we are working towards it. And again, with action plans, they need to be kept live. We can all write documents and put them in a drawer and let them gather dust, but your action plans do need to be brought out, you know, at CPD days, at staff team meetings, you know, shared and prompted across all of your different meetings that you have with your counterparts. And for me personally, and a few other people in my team, my heads of department, we continue to be part of the Association of Colleges Mental Health Communities of Practice. So if you have the chance to be invited to those, or you're not sure about those, then, you know, contact Jen or somebody within your networks, get along to those communities of best practice, because they are really helpful to me as a member of this group. Go to my next slide. So in terms of raising staff for wellness, as I said, awareness, we do have wellbeing days and celebration days. So we look at our CPD days across the calendar. Some of those are dedicated to just wellbeing, and some of them are dedicated to just celebration of staff, hard work and commitment. And in the other CPD days, which are focused around teaching and learning and business support staff development, we always have a nod around making sure that people understand, you know, if they have got concerns from a staff point of view about their wellbeing, that they can come and chat to someone throughout those CPD days. The committee I was talking about, so we have here a wellbeing and workload committee. I was quite horrified when the word workload committee was, I'll just wave my arm to turn my office light on, because I can imagine, and I was a bit like, oh my gracious, you know, I'm going to have teachers and everyone talking about their workload. But, you know, it's really useful. We have lots of honest conversations, and our union representatives come along to those meetings. So it's just a space, a safe space for staff across the college, not all managers, but some practitioners, to come along with myself and my Director of Human Resources, and to actually talk about how they feel wellbeing and workload is being supported within the college. And again, if people aren't aware of it, the DfE have got an education staff wellbeing charter. So, and I've popped a link there. We did use that as a starting point to really look at whether or not we were doing what we needed to do to support our staff in terms of having a wellbeing charter. And what I've noticed whilst I've been doing this and whilst I've been at Newham College is that we really do promote our employee support programme, and we really do ensure that we use our occupational health referrals fully, so that staff feel that they are getting the right support, especially if they've had a period of illness, whether it's work related or not. And if staff are having difficulties for whatever reason, either personal or through work, we ensure that they understand that the employee support programme is there for them to contact, and it's confidential, and they can reach out and get external support if they don't feel that there's somebody in the college they can go to, or if they just want to, you know, reach out to independent people rather than perhaps their line manager or the HR department at the college. Then we can go on to our next slide. So in terms of some new staff posts, so these have all happened this academic year. So I've got a team of academic and pastoral support tutors. So they have 1 foot in academia, so 1 foot in supporting students that may be falling behind from an academic point of view, but they also have 1 foot in the pastoral landscape. So they report into myself, they don't report into safeguarding, they don't report into curriculum heads, they report in via myself as a vice principal. And we look at caseload, we look at parts of the learner journey and when we feel they're best placed, and they can make appropriate referrals and have all of the knowledge that they need to make referrals around mental health if they need to. I've got pastoral support officers, so we have student lounges. Again, being Newham, a lot of our learners want to be on college site. They don't want to be out in the streets due to the demographics, due to some of the challenges we have around exploitation and keeping our learners safe. Most of our learners are local learners or are from the very near surrounding boroughs. So what I found was that those spaces were getting really used, but there was no staff presence in there, and I didn't want to keep sending security in there. It wasn't giving the right message. So I've now got 3 pastoral support officers who work term time only, but all day. So our student lounges on our 3 campuses are open from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. And we staff them with pastoral support officers and my student enrichment team. So they're manned all the time for students to have someone that they can talk to. We had a duty manager system where curriculum heads and business support directors were operating a duty management system. Again, it wasn't working well. There weren't cohesive reports. They didn't know the learners. So I've now got 2 campus liaison coordinators who work alongside our security team. And again, that gives them the ability to work with security and ensure that students are adhering to college rules, but it also enables them to get to know our learners and to also go to curriculum team meetings to understand where learners may have challenges in terms of behaviour or backgrounds, etc., etc. I have a set of welfare, safeguarding welfare officers. I've just increased those by 1 FTE. So I now have 4 safeguarding and welfare officers and 1 retention and wellbeing officer. They form the discrete safeguarding and welfare team under my head of service. And then we have just developed a tutorial coordinator. Our tutorials sit with our teachers, so it's our teaching staff that deliver our tutorials. And we've now decided that we need a tutorial coordinator to actually look at appropriate resources and to plan that scheme of work and ensure that our tutorials are fit for purpose for our young study programme learners. Next slide, please. The other post we've got within our additional learning support team is an additional learning support development officer. He is very, very knowledgeable around autism awareness. He goes out, as well as working within the ALS department, he does all of our staff development around autism awareness, social behavioural communication. He talks to staff about how they can build effective rapport with students that might have an autistic spectrum diagnosis. So it's not just about students with educational healthcare plans. Jeff will go out and talk to staff members around how they can support learners that may be demonstrating challenging behaviour. And he's also there to do any dedicated training. So we asked him to do dedicated training with our security staff to ensure that our security staff understood that if a student came in and perhaps was not presenting in a way that they normally would, or their behaviour seemed a little bit out of kilter, that they understood how they could work with that learner rather than it being, you know, a security guard that was how can I put this delicately, a security guard that was not able to support a learner in the right way and was seen as a barrier to that learner entering the building in a looked after type of way. The next slide, please. So again, student engagement, it was touched upon in some of the earlier slides around, you know, the mental health charter, but I, again, look after all of the admissions and enrolment processes as well as the induction. So from our student perspective, we have early contact. So we ask our learners from quite early stages through interview processes and application processes around whether they've got any declarations or disclosures. And if they do, the safeguarding and welfare team will reach out to them, invite them in for settling in days, early talks and tours around the college. Through enrolment, I do an additional disclosure form. So as much as they will complete an enrolment form, ours is all electronic, we have a dedicated desk throughout our enrolment period where our safeguarding and welfare team sit, and learners will fill in an additional disclosure form which asks some of the soft questions around you know, do they feel they have mental health concerns? Are they supported externally by any other agencies? Did they get additional support in school? So this isn't about students with learning difficulties and disabilities per se in terms of educational healthcare plans. This is asking learners, is there, you know, were they accessing any other sort of support aside from what we asked during the traditional enrolment form process. Inductions, we carry out face-to-face. We go into all of the groups. We do have our virtual learning environment has videos and things on it, but we do ensure that our induction is face-to-face because I think there's nothing you know, more important for learners than to get face-to-face contact with the support staff that are there to support them. We have targeted enrichment weeks, so we have a college calendar. We look at all of those targeted enrichment weeks around celebrating you know, mental health, dyslexia, LGBT, and you know, that's something I know lots of colleges do, but it's about not losing sight of that and ensuring that it fits alongside your tutorial. So, you know, ensuring that your tutorial program is embedded all year long and conversations recur throughout your tutorial program, that it's not just a, oh, you know, I did something here in week 6 and I don't repeat it again until the following academic year. And again, just talking a little bit about external agencies, including the NHS, and additional funding that we look at to help us with the resources and training.
I'm going to take the presentation from Peter next, and then there'll be the opportunity to have some discussion and to ask some questions. Because I imagine resources and existing budgets is likely to be, or pressure on existing budgets is likely to be one of the things that we discuss. So without further ado, can I thank Sharon and hand over to Peter Mayhew-Smith. Peter's the Group Principal and CEO of South Thames Colleges Group. Has worked in the FE sector for a significant period of time and has seen South Thames Colleges Group come through a merger of Kingston Carshalton College and South Thames College. So he's now responsible for something like over 20,000 students and a £70 million turnover. So a pretty significantly large organisation, and one that was judged good at their last Ofsted inspection. So delighted to have Peter with us today to talk about some of the work that he's been doing in the Trailblazer. I have to declare an interest here because I'm an honorary member of the Trailblazer advisory group that that Peter hosts, and it's been an absolute privilege watching how that work has developed over time. So, Peter, can I hand over to you there now, please? Oh, Peter's still muted.
Oh,
there you go.
We've
got you back.
I've done it myself. I got permission. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me along, and thank you, Mary, for that extremely accurate introduction. That's definitely me. So I recognised all the detail there. I'm actually speaking about this, our experience is much more from a cluster point of view. So we're a group of colleges in southwest London working together to develop whole organisational approaches to wellbeing and mental health. So I've actually not used the STCG slide template, but the one from the Southwest London Health and Care Partnership, because I think that gives you a good sense of what we're doing. So you've got the 3 colleges, Croydon, Richmond, which is part of Harrow, Richmond and Uxbridge Colleges group, and then our lovely big South Thames Colleges group as well. And on the next slide, you should be able to see the inception of this whole program was actually through, if you think back a little while, you'll remember that the lady at the back of that picture was once Prime Minister, and she took a really strong interest at that time in mental health and the development of a system that integrated NHS services and schools. Actually a very successful innovation, I would say, and one I'd like to talk to you about in more detail across the 6 boroughs in South London. And it put mental health teams directly into schools, primary, secondary, and FE colleges. That was the most extraordinary thing, that we only had to knock on the door a couple of times, and the partners in the Health and Care Partnership said, yes, absolutely, come on in. It's really important that the students in an FE college have access to a similar service. So we were absolutely over the moon to be included. And you can see on the next slide just what that looked like in terms of geography. So we became part of the biggest national mental health trailblazer in the country, spanning those 6 South London boroughs. Obviously a really complicated community that we're serving, and with a really diverse population spread across those different locations. If you look on the next slide, it'll give you another sense of scale, because I think that gives us the numbers. Yeah, there we go. So we're looking at the time when we got started in 2020, about 17,000 adults, just short of 10,000 young people. So nearly 30,000 students were involved in the whole program. And actually, it's a very small green line at the top there, where you can see the high needs students, but they became a really big focus of the work that we did. And I will pick out some of the details as I go to make sure that you can see the work we tried to do to make sure they were supported successfully. If we go on to the next slide, we're seeing incidents of about 20% of our students of our young students having mental ill health, and have casework, very detailed case reporting now that measures progress. And actually, once we introduced the Trailblazer, what we found is that the awareness, the readiness for people to name and deal with this kind of ill health became stronger, and actually incidence rates went up, not down. So we were able to identify more people successfully, but at an earlier stage, using some of the practitioner types that we introduced into our organizations. And on the next slide, you'll see that we picked out certain program types: health and social care, construction, where there were higher than average suicide risks. And we wanted to walk towards those areas, develop programs that were related to the particular experiences of students studying in those areas. And you can imagine that the demographics and the people choosing those different professions are actually very different. And the work that we did adapted very closely to the different types of needs that those students were presented when they came through as having a mental health support need. So if we go on to our next slide. So a big part of this is the resourcing, but I don't want it to just be about resourcing, because that was important, but actually the 5th bullet point there, the whole organisation approach, was probably more transformatory than having the team of education welfare practitioners, the clinical psychologists, the lead professionals working within the colleges, and the coordinator, which meant that we effectively had a mini CAM service actually within the buildings of our colleges. And so that instead of a referral taking several months or years even for some of our students, a member of staff who was concerned about a case could say to the student, just go round the corner, we have a triage facility there, and you will be able to start work with either an EWP or a clinical psychologist this afternoon if we identify that that's necessary. So we could shortcut all of those long lags in the CAM system and make services directly available on demand to students who could see a doctor of psychiatry or a clinical specialist or an education welfare practitioner pretty much as soon as they presented as having needs at a particular level or of a particular kind. But as I say, the really transformatory part for us was not so much having those wonderful people as part of our college communities, but changing the way we thought about the responsibility for mental health, and taking a real sense of ownership of what that meant for our students across all the colleges involved here. So if we move on, I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. And there were a number of initiatives. So we saw CBT, guided self-help through the education welfare practitioners, resilience workshop for students, that should say, sorry, we've got a correction to make, and their families, because actually what we also discovered is a lot of families were very active in this domain, and that these young people were often presenting to us with needs that had persisted through later secondary school phases, and they wanted help, they wanted continuity, and they wanted to find out how they could do more for the young people they were sending to college. So we did a whole range of different workshops. We're currently doing ones, guess what, to deal with exam stress and anxiety. We had mental health tutorial inputs working around the colleges, so that's from the specialist team supporting staff into the tutorials with strategies and techniques to help identify and deal with mental health needs. And we work around training our college management teams on how to deal with the issues that arise from mental ill health. And we work closely with the clinical lead to make changes to our systems, our referrals, to speed those up, to engage actively with students and encourage self-referral and triage systems within all the different colleges. So we've got another slide with other practices that we wanted to share. So there's the triage and referral structures, the rapid referral routes, and the user engagement program, which allowed students to feed in directly and say very clearly what they felt they needed through a whole range of different activities, forums, surveys, conferences. And we appointed a mental health governor, as we felt that the practice was rising through the organisation to the extent that governors took a very active interest in what was affecting our students. And on the next slide, you'll see some of the other elements that we introduced, which was a really complex program of ongoing CPD. Even as I'm sitting here, I'm seeing Outlook reminders popping up for very specific training programs for our students. We've got mental health first aid, suicide prevention, self-harm, all of these different activities that have helped us to become more effective in this regard. And we've just finished a program of trauma-informed practice training, at which we had 300 staff attendees going through a certificated program there. So we feel that the organisation has embraced and developed a sense of ownership about what it's like to go through some of the challenges and the difficulties that our young people and adults are facing across the group. We have very strong networks where we're training up governors, practitioners at all sorts of different levels, and students themselves are now undertaking mental health first aid training too as part of their enrichment provision. So if we just press on to the next slide, these are some comments. We've got students that we've just captured some cases. This is one of our very first bits of feedback through one of the early years through the pandemic. Student with very high levels of anxiety, not attending college very confidently, and showing more than doubling her levels of confidence through that program of support. And then on the next slide, you'll see another student's case where she was returning to college after lockdowns, really struggling. We were working with her, quite often doing lessons in her parents' car in the car park before they were able to come into college. And actually, we found that focusing on sleep was helping a lot of our students to be more relaxed and more prepared for life back in college. One of the projects that we're working on now is on the next slide, where we're seeing we want to build a much stronger transition program from school to college, because we know that a lot of young people come up through year 11 with needs that will continue to need attention. So if we look at the next slide, we've identified some of the causes alongside our partners in the NHS, and seeing some of the challenges that are really having big effects on student outcomes and their transitions between different phases of the education system. So on the next slide, you'll see that we focused on the transition between those first two phases, and making sure that we've got transition protocols in place with a number of local schools that capture need and allow us to see very clearly what the risks are for students coming forward. So there's still stuff to develop. We've got work to do, but our attention is constantly drawn to the demands of this kind of population and the challenges they face, and we're able to make really meaningful interventions there. Next slide. And then we did put some focus in on staff wellbeing. Very like Sharon, we developed a staff wellbeing strategy. Onto the next slide, we took an approach. I think this comes from the GLA's Good Work Standard, which has a real focus on values, ethics, communication, knowledge, transparency. So you'll see how we translated that into practice on the next slide, where we talk about the domains that we wanted to work on. And we wanted to create a culture, which you'll see on the next slide, where it was a very strong emphasis on people's dignity, the mutual respect that we felt was important at work. Our staff were clear that they are very values driven in their careers, and they want to see strong emphasis on inclusion and diversity. There should be high levels of care, real acknowledgement of the things that people face in their family backgrounds, and that we're able to work with those with colleagues on those sorts of challenges. We pay close attention to data, and actually have started bringing wellbeing audits, sickness levels, turnover rates by department to our governing bodies, so that they can drill into that, and making sure that we've got a very open two-way track in terms of information and communication with our staff at all sorts of levels. On the next slide, we talk a little bit about leadership and management. I won't pause long, but we knew through all of the staff focus groups that we had to lead by example. We had to set out really specific hygiene factors, get controls in place to manage those, make sure that in the volatility of a typical FE college, we were trying to underpin one of the things that makes people most anxious of all, obviously, which is their job security, and introducing wellbeing champions in line with the Time to Change programme. So on the next slide, we just talk a little bit about the recognition and reward. We do have service and excellence award ceremonies. We have uprated our pay system, tried to create a much fairer pay and grading structure for all our staff. We're buying additional schemes when we can afford them. And this year we've made the decision to cut our teachers' contact hours, as that was clearly one of the biggest factors in sickness and stress levels, and introduce the absolute maximum holiday allowance we possibly can by building in additional wellbeing days and having Christmas closure periods where nobody's expected to work. And in fact, we just shut the buildings and don't let anybody in. We're looking at the Mayor's Good Work Standard as well. On to the next slide, Mary, I'll be there in just a minute. We're looking at CPD entitlements, making sure that people have good opportunities to develop themselves. And we have a fund which people can bid to do courses elsewhere, and have made all of our adult education programs free for our staff as well. We're trying to introduce a volunteering entitlement and a talent management scheme for people aspiring to develop their careers within the organisation too. And then final slide, will give you a picture of the really important team and social events. And this sounds a bit daft, but actually people attend our sport and wellbeing activities in droves. It's a phenomenal thing, the number of people at Pilates or yoga or football each week, when we give people time to attend those kinds of activities. And fruit was incredibly popular, giving teams the right to plan their own development programs, so that they had charge of all of that. And yes, we have some terrific parties. We really put a bit of budget in there as well to thank and celebrate and let our hair down. So we've taken an approach, I think, that absolutely captures the very first steps of what's needed in an organisation that embraces this and owns the consequences of its actions on the people studying and working in it. That's it.
Thank you. That's really helpful. A fantastic overview and very motivated. I also love the fact that you think parties deserve their own bullet point as well. I'm with you on that. Healthy lifestyle and parties. I'm sure they're not mutually exclusive. So, and I'm very conscious that we are out of time, but I've also noticed that not very many people have dropped off yet. So I'm going to take chaired liberty of just posing just two questions. That one that's been raised in the chat. Well, they both arise from things in the chat. The one is both to Peter and to Sharon, which is the one about resources. You've obviously had to make some difficult decisions in places about how to direct resources into well-being rather than into other things, which could be equally as important, learner support in classrooms, etc. So I just wondered if you could both just briefly comment. Sharon, you started to comment about having to make a business case. If you could just briefly comment about the importance of redirection of resources.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. We all know that funding and finances are a challenge. I suppose part of it, because I do look after recruitment, was, looking at our student numbers, attracting learners, ensuring our reputation. It sort of comes hand in hand. If you can demonstrate you're a college that's caring and, looking after your students, you tend to attract more because it's very word of mouth. It's a bit of an aside, but actually I took my first 6 months at the college. I actually went out and visited all of our local schools. So I think when it talks about community, I think there is something to be said that you need to sometimes think sideways to get to where you need to do. So I went out and I visited all of the local schools. I spoke to, the careers advisors. I spoke to head teachers, assistant head teachers where I could to get traction with the schools. But I also build and try and build in every local authority area that I work in good relationships with your borough. So I think, again, it's really important to be talking to the borough. Yeah, and the voluntary agencies within your borough, just to see what's out there and tap into any extra bits of money. In terms of the staffing bit, I just had to make the case to exec that if we're going to lose students, if our attrition rates continued the way they were going, and some of that was due to mental health, so it's having your statistics to demonstrate, actually, give me some money to put into the support posts and we'll turn that around.
Super, thank you. Peter, did you have a comment to make?
Yeah. Well, in terms of resources, we started this programme with what I think was quite a disparate set of counsellors, youth workers, pastoral tutors, and so on. But actually, and so we had a set of resources already there, but actually creating the whole organisation approach and working very closely with the NHS teams in each of the colleges, we actually found that we were assembling existing resources much more effectively,
Yeah.
and having a coherent strategy. So we've created a culture that bonds all of those different elements together in a single program. We also then went through a formula-based approach to say, well, if we have this many students, we're going to have this many cases, and therefore we're going to need this many pastoral tutors, counsellors, clinical psychologists, EWPs, and so on, and have been trialling other types of activity. Just recently, a student community officer, which sounds a lot like some of the things that you've been doing too, Sharon, to help with behaviour and managing just the low-level stuff that goes on in colleges, but which can escalate and frighten vulnerable students silently into leaving the organisation. So interventions around those kinds of things are important. We've just also put in a bid to the NHS team for an extra 50,000 to look at an attendance-focused mental health project, because there's a bit of an underspend there that they've identified that they can recycle into the colleges too. So we're absolutely blessed by the availability of resources through the NHS as well, and we have a host of voluntary organisations, from Papyrus to well, just lots of little mental health charities that work very closely with us, and less with A&E.
Super, that's really helpful. And actually that answers one of the questions which Jen posted in the chat, which was about which partners are important in terms of this joint working. So it is NHS plus a whole set of voluntary and community partners, as well as Sharon pointed out, local authorities. There's a question about digital interventions, which you might want to just answer in the chat if you don't mind, and I'll just take this one final question and invite Jen to comment if she's with us, which is around are there groups set up that enable people to, and in fact she's answered it in the chat, so I'll give you the opportunity to mention our communities of practice, Jen.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, so we wanted to make sure there was that space for staff to come together to definitely share that good practice and signpost to new resources, and kind of obviously listen to the experience within colleges with regard to staff and student mental health. But we also wanted to make sure there was space for colleagues to check in with each other as well, because again, we talk about student mental health, we talk about staff mental health, but we also need to remember to check in on ourselves too, because you are the ones who are looking after everybody else. So with our communities of practice, they're there for that we've kind of said the senior mental health lead within a college, but anyone with that responsibility for student mental health, just send me your details and I'll make sure you've got the invitation to join the community of practice.
That's fantastic, thank you. And these details will be shared as part of the presentations, as I said earlier, and be shared with all the participants today. So can I just thank each of the speakers, Jen, Laura, Sharon and Peter, really helpful. A particular thank you to Nadia for pulling this together, and to Thrive London for supporting it. A great opportunity for people to share practice, and a reminder that there is going to be another webinar on 6th of March, which is around supporting the whole college approach, but particularly focusing on working with local support partnerships and networks. So if you're interested in attending that, then look out for the link for that particular network. And also, Nadia's invited any comments to go to her for any future themes of presentations that would be useful. So thank you so much, everybody, for your participation today, and I hope you found it a worthwhile experience. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.